Great to be here, and I think a very, very exciting time in the broader context of agriculture. Yes, agriculture did well out of the budget last night. In fact, I think it's been set out as one of the winners out of the budget last night. But in the broader scheme of things, when you look at what's happening around the globe at the moment, I think it's quite an exciting time for agriculture, and I've had the opportunity to see that personally a number of times in the last few months. I was at Australia Business Week in India with Andrew Robb in January, and the interest in agriculture there and the opportunities for agriculture for Australia were really quite interesting. A very different offering to, I think, what we're considering ourselves at the moment. I don't think Australian agriculture really understands what it has to offer in the context of services, and so some opportunities for development there, and that also manifests out of some of the things that were in the budget last night. I had the opportunity to travel to Japan and China recently, taking a forestry delegation over there, but also doing some other work around food while I was in those countries, and at a breakfast in Beijing 3 weeks ago to talk about the opportunities that come out of the free trade agreement. They had to move the function that I addressed 4 times to find a venue big enough, and so considerable interest from across the sector in China, and that was from investors who were looking to invest or to partner into Australia for agriculture. But really interestingly, from my perspective, was the presence of a number of quite large online retailers. And I think that's something that we need to be considering as part of our offering and opportunity into China into the future, and a different supply chain to what we're currently considering. And when I went down to Shanghai a day or so later, I ran into a couple of quite small Australian exporters. One was an apple farmer from Tasmania who had a unique variety. They were selling that basically through online retailers into Shanghai, and the retailer that I spoke to there had 5 million subscribers in 30 cities in China. So here's a small operator with a unique product, badged, and getting a pretty reasonable price. He was very happy with what the opportunity was for him in that space. And last week I was in Turkey at the G20 Ag Ministers, and the conversations there around broader food security, what I had the opportunity to see while I was in Turkey was really quite interesting, particularly in the context of some things that we don't do here. I flew into a city called Antalya early last week, and as I came in and looking out the window, there was this sea of protected horticulture. If anyone wants to have a look at my Twitter site, and I'll get a chance to plug it, at Richard M. Colbeck, there's a photograph of the spread of protected horticulture across the approaches to Antalya Airport, and it was quite mind-boggling. It really was. And then, of course, the discussion with ag ministers from the top 20 business nations in the world around food security, the food supply task, and food waste. And so significant opportunities, I think, globally for agriculture, a lot for us to learn, a lot for us to offer, and I think a lot for us to understand what we might have to offer, particularly in the context of our skills, our business knowledge, and our farming skills, particularly into some of the developing nations. That includes India and China, which are the two that are growing at an enormous rate at the moment. And talking to people from the FAO, the comment that they made was how lucky we are to have such a strong private sector in this country, which can actually drive innovation. It surprised me in a number of places that I went to how government were the ones that led in the topics and the areas for innovation, including in a place like Turkey, where their R&D is managed by government, and it's the government that decides the priorities for R&D in that country. In India, I was talking to some vets, and they said, who controls the genetics in your country? And I said, well, of course the farmers do. And they were a bit put out because that was their job, and they were government vets. So the things that we do every day in agriculture in this country, the skills that we have in our agricultural sector, I think can form part of an offering in a service sense for this country going out in developing relationships, particularly in developing countries like India, which can then flow on to be part of a produce-based offering. India's dairy industry produces 5 litres per cow per day. Australia's is 25. They're looking to increase their capacity significantly because they're a country that's already got a dairy consuming economy. They're the largest producers of dairy in the world and the largest consumers of dairy in the world, but they need to lift their productivity. They're looking for genetics, they're looking for farm management skills, they're looking for pasture improvement, they're looking for a whole range of things. And it's not just one of those elements that's going to help them lift their industry. And that's one great example. We'll get a visit, I think, from the National Dairy Development Board later this year off the back of that visit that we made in January. So some real opportunities to build on trade. So coming to the budget and what that provided last night, Barnaby and I sat down yesterday afternoon just to go through what was sitting in the budget and how we would look at the opportunities that came from it. And Barnaby said to me, think of your home state, Richard, and think of a farm down there and what opportunities the budget might bring for it. And so in the context of somewhere in the Northern Midlands, for example, where we've just spent throughout the state in Tassie about $500 million on putting in infrastructure to deliver water, to distribute water around the state. I can see a real rush in people wanting to put in that on-farm irrigation infrastructure to actually apply the water in an efficient way, and they can get a tax deduction for that up front. I see that as being a real opportunity. And now that sort of thing, that efficiency of water distribution, that water infrastructure that we know is so important for agriculture nationally, I can see people applying the new rates on that quite quickly. We then talked about the opportunities to restructure the way that the farm was set up, and at home in the Northern Midlands, a lot of those farms wouldn't have been doing dairy, for example. So if they want to do a dairy conversion, the fencing that goes with that is now tax deductible instead of being tax deductible over a longer period of time. And of course then the infrastructure to store your fodder, particularly grain or something like that, that has improved tax deductibility status as well. I think these are all things that are really quite important, and they also form part of the basis that we're looking to do for agriculture nationally in applying the opportunity for farmers to look after the climate variability that we know is such a significant part of agriculture. Set themselves up so that when the tougher times come, the infrastructure's there for them to support it, whether it's distribution of water and application of water in an efficient way, or whether it's being able to store the fodder and have that storage capacity on site. But then when you also look at some of the other initiatives that come through from a small business perspective, the opportunities there for deductibility of any purchase up to $20,000 and the change in those rules, again, not just for on-farm, but if you're a small farm services business, the opportunity to have those items tax deductible. The opportunity for a business that turns over less than $2 million to get a lower tax rate at 28.5%, a reduction of 1.5, or if you're not an incorporated business, and we know that many, many small businesses aren't, including farming businesses because they're family businesses, a 5% reduction in your taxation up to $1,000. All of these things really start to add up for the rural sector and for rural communities, importantly, because it's not just about the on-farm, it's also about those small businesses that serve our rural sector, the service-based businesses that get that opportunity too. The change in FBT requirements around IT. basically bringing our settings in that space to where people are in the operation of their IT requirements.